Once upon a time, there lived a girl named Dami who wanted to be an arm robber. Dami was only 9 years old. The morning she walked into the kitchen, looked at her mother straight in the eyes with a calmness that no child her age could carry. Mama, I want to be an arm robber. Bumi looked at her from up to down. She looked up from the pot of soup that she was stirring and froze in her tracks. For a few seconds, she thought her eyes had failed her. What did you say? She asked gently, trying to hold her voice steady. I said I want to be an arm robber, Dami repeated, her tiny hands gripping the edge of the table as she stared at her mother. Bumi stood there stunned as she tried to understand why her daughter was saying this. Then from the hallway, Tunde, her father, walked out stretching, his voice thick with sleep. She wants to be what? He chuckled. An arm robber, Bumi said, her voice barely above a whisper. Tunde burst into laughter. This girl is hilarious, so he said. When I was small, I used to say I wanted to be an army robber. I thought it meant an army officer. He chuckled again, slapping his thigh. Don't mind her, Bumi. She must have mixed it up too. You know children and their funny grammar. But Dami was not smiling. In fact, she turned away and walked out of the kitchen, leaving behind her parents, who had no idea that she meant every word that she said. The idea did not just pop out of thin air. It began months earlier in her school. On one afternoon, when Dami was packing her books into her school bag, she overheard her teachers talking loudly in the corridor. They were discussing about a famous arm robber who had been terrorizing the state of late. Dami stood there and watched as she saw how terrified her teachers were of the man who they spoke about. She was so amazed to realize that someone existed that terrified her teachers to their bones. So she returned home that evening and began to search for the robber online. Her parents got her a tablet a few months ago for her birthday, never imagining that one day Dami would use it to look up one of the most feared criminals in the country. Dami did not know how to spell his name exactly. However, she remembered her teachers calling him the Stone. So she typed out the name and included Nigeria behind it, and then she saw so many posts about him. Dami was so intrigued by how people feared him. She wanted that for herself and wondered how she was going to reach out to him. Dami created a fake social media account and began to post, asking if anyone could help her locate the Stone. She didn't care if he was a criminal. She didn't care what he had done. All she knew was that people feared him and she wanted to be feared like him. Dami continued to make posts day and night, hoping that someone would somehow link her up with the notorious man. Days passed and one of her posts began to go viral. People reshared the post, wondering why a person in his right senses would be looking for a notorious criminal. The comments rolled in by the dozens as people asked if it was a prank. Some believed it was the police, using a fake account as decoy to catch the criminals. Others urged the poster to delete the post before the police tracks him or her. Little did they know that the poster was a 9-year-old girl filled with so much curiosity. Days passed and Dami returned home from school to find a message sitting in her inbox. It was from an anonymous account. No profile picture, no name, just one line that asked why she was looking for the stone. Dami's heart skipped a beat as she picked up her tablet and began to type. Because I want to be like him. I want people to fear me. I want to protect my mother, she wrote as she clicked send. A few minutes later, she received a reply asking what her story was, and Dami, with trembling hands, began to pour it all out. My father beats my mother. He screams at her, slaps her, pushes her to the floor. Every day she cries, and I can't do anything about it. Nobody does anything. But people like you, they are feared. Nobody dares to touch you. I want that. I want to protect my mother, even if it means me becoming an arm robber like you. Dami clicked send as she waited patiently for a reply. She sat there hopeful as she heard her father hit her mother hard across her face because the meat she put in his soup was not as big as he expected. Her mother screamed from the living room as her father hit her repeatedly as he continued to yell angrily at her. Useless woman! How many times will I say that I'm not a child? You think I won't notice the size of meat you put for me? Please, Tunde, we have run out of meat and I was too sick to go to the market. Before she could finish speaking, Tunde gave her a very hot slap across her face. Dami's fingers trembled as she thought of what to do. She could not take it anymore, as her mother's cries broke her heart in ways that she could not explain. With tears in her eyes, she opened the message thread again and began to type. My daddy is beating my mommy right now, and she is crying. Please tell me what to do. I want to become like you. I can't take this any longer. This time, the message was marked red as Dami's heart pounded in her chest. However, the person did not respond, and Dami felt so disappointed. Her mother's cries were now quieter, but not because the beating had stopped. Her mother had simply run out of strength to scream. Dami looked at the tablet again, but still there was no reply. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand and began to type again. Please, I need help. I'm only 9, but I don't want to wait until I'm big. I want to stop him now. Minutes passed, but still there was no response. Disappointed, Dami tossed the tablet to the side as she ran out through the back door to go find help. She ran to their neighbor's house, but their neighbor was not around. Dami tried to stop some strangers on the road, but no one was willing to help her, seeing that it was already getting dark. With the insecurity in the state, no one was willing to risk their lives. Strangers walked past her, and some looked at her with pity. Most did not even look at all, as she screamed and begged for help. Please, someone help me. He's hurting my mommy. But no one stopped. No one did anything. And Dami, heartbroken and in pain, stood in the middle of the street, watching as the world walked past her, as if she was invisible. Tears poured down her face as she turned and walked home, her body cold from the wind and her spirits colder from what she now knew, that no one was ever coming to save them. A few minutes later, she arrived home and met her father, who was cleaning his shoes as if nothing had happened. Her mother was on the floor in the corner, barely moving, her face swollen, her arms bruised, her eyes shut tight, as Dami rushed to her side to check on her. Mommy, she whispered as tears began to pour down her eyes. I'm sorry, Mommy. I tried, but no one agreed to help. Bumi opened her eyes weakly, her lips barely moving as she began to speak. It's okay, Dami, she whispered. Just sleep. Tomorrow will be better. But Dami did not believe her. Not anymore. She helped her mother to her room, laid her down gently and retired back to her own room. Dami cried herself to sleep. Her pillow soaked, her tiny heart carrying a pain too heavy for her to carry. Hours later, immediately the clock struck midnight, Dami was awoken by a loud piercing scream coming from her parents' room, a scream that didn't belong to her mother. It was her father screaming as he begged for his dear life. Dami could not understand what was happening. She could not understand why her father was screaming in the middle of the night, so she tiptoed out of bed, barefoot, silent as she crept down the hallway. Dami arrived at the door to her parents' room, her eyes wide open in shock as she saw a strange man in their room. A tall, broad-shouldered man, wearing a black mask on his face, dressed in all black. Her father was on the floor, crawling backwards, blood on his lip, with his eyes wide open in terror. Dami clamped her hand over her mouth, her heart pounding so loudly in her chest as she watched the masked man stand over her father, holding a gun in his hand as he began to speak, his voice deep, calm and dangerous. I didn't come to steal tonight. I came to warn you. If you ever raise your hand to that woman again, I'll return, and next time, I won't just beat you. Dami's father shook his head violently, trembling like a leaf. Please, I'm sorry. I won't try it again. Please don't do anything to me. Save it, the man snapped. Then he turned his head slightly and looked directly at Dami, who was now hiding by the door. She gasped. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just nodded once, a small nod of respect, a small nod that said, I got your message. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the door, silently, like a shadow melting into the darkness. The door clicked shut. For a long moment, the entire house was silent. Tunde remained on the floor trembling, sweating, gasping for breath, like a man who had just seen death face to face. Dami slowly backed away from the door and ran to her room, her heart pounding in her ears. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't think. She only knew one thing. Stone had answered her message. The next morning, sunlight filled the house as if nothing had happened, but something had definitely happened. Something big. Tunde came out of the room limping, his face bruised, looking over his shoulder every few seconds, like someone was following him. He jumped at every noise. He flinched when a spoon dropped in the kitchen, and as soon as he saw Bumi sitting quietly on the couch, he exploded. "So this is what you've been doing?" he screamed, pointing at her with a shaky hand. "You called your boyfriend to come beat me up? You useless woman." Bumi looked shocked. "Tunde, what are you saying? I don't know who he is." Before she could even finish talking, Tunde slapped her hard across her face that she fell to the floor. But Tunde was not done, not even close. "You think you can disgrace me?" he roared. "You think you can bring a man into my house to lay hands on me?" "Tunde, I swear, I don't know the man," Bumi cried, trying to crawl away. But Tunde dragged her up by her arm and hit her again and again, more violently than he had ever done before. Dami cried helplessly in the hallway as she listened to her mother cry out for help. "Tunde, please stop," Bumi begged, her voice breaking as her pleas fell on deaf ears. Tunde stormed into their bedroom and grabbed Bumi's phones, her tablet, every gadget that belonged to her. He seized them all as he dragged Bumi towards the guest room. "If you think you can cheat on me and go scot-free, then you are more mad than I ever imagined," he snarled. "Let me see how you will call that useless boyfriend of yours." "Tunde, please, I didn't call anybody," she cried, her words shaking with fear as he pushed her inside the guest room and locked the door. Bumi screamed and banged on the door, but Tunde ignored her and walked away. Dami had never seen her father lock her mother in a room before. She tried to plead with him, but her father pushed her away in anger, something he had never done before. The entire house now felt different, colder, darker even, like something evil had moved in during the night. Her mother's cries came through the locked door as she pleaded for Tunde to let her out, but Tunde did not even look in her direction. He paced the hallway like a wounded animal, still shaking, still terrified from Stone's visit. Dami ran into her room and slammed the door shut. She buried her face in her hands as she thought of what next to do. Her father had taken all her mother's phones, as well as her tablet, not remembering that Dami had the tablet in her room. Dami sat there terrified as she reached under her pillow and pulled out the tablet, her fingers shaking as she typed. "Stone, please, my daddy has locked my mommy inside the room. He took all her phones. He's beating her and saying she brought her boyfriend to beat him up last night. He's very angry and I'm scared. Please, we need your help. Save my mother." She sent the message and waited for a reply, but Stone did not reply her message. Dami was unsure if he had seen it or not. She sat there trembling as she stared at the tablet, praying that Stone answers her cry again. However, hours passed and her message sat there like an abandoned project. Dami could not sit back and watch her father accuse her mother of something that she did not do. So she approached him to confess, stating that she was the one who contacted the man that came to beat him up. Her father looked at her as if she had miraculously grown horns. "You what?" Tunde asked, his voice low and dangerous. Dami stood her ground, her voice trembling as she narrated everything to him. "I sent him the message. I was the one who contacted him, not mommy. She didn't even know." For a moment, the entire house fell silent. Tunde blinked and burst into laughter, a loud mocking laughter that echoed through the house like thunder. "You mean you brought that man into our home? A little girl like you?" He walked closer to Dami, who was now shaking. "You think you're funny, right? You think I'm stupid?" "I'm not lying, Daddy," Dami insisted. "I just wanted you to stop hurting mommy." Tunde's eyes narrowed. "You think I don't know what's going on? You think I don't know that your mother put you up to this? She sent you to lie to me, didn't she? To cover up her tracks?" "No, she didn't," Dami cried, but it was already too late. Tunde had made up his mind. He turned and stormed down the hallway like a man who was now possessed. "No more games," he growled. She thinks she's smart, right? Using a child to cover up her shame." "Daddy, please." Dami ran after him, sobbing. "Please, mommy didn't do anything." But her father did not stop. He unlocked the guest room and flung it open as he charged towards his wife, who was laying on the floor weak from the beating he gave her earlier. Before she could even speak, Tunde dragged her by the arm. "I warned you," he roared angrily, his eyes wild like a beast. You think you can fool me? Even using our own child to lie to me? No, Tunde, please, I don't know what you're talking about, she said to Tunde, who did not believe her. His fist flew. His rage exploded. He beat her mercilessly, worse than ever before, as if all his humiliation, all his fear from the night before had to be poured out to someone. Dami stood frozen in the corner, screaming, crying, begging him to stop, but her words meant nothing. To Tunde, it was all betrayal, a lie that a mother had told her daughter to tell. Dami could not take it anymore. She ran to her room, terrified, as she stared at her tablet in regret, blaming herself for all that her mother was going through. That night, just as the house fell into silence again, and Tunde finally sat back to rest from his violent outburst, a thunderous bang shook the front door of their house. Nobody moved, they said, as 6 uniformed officers stormed into the house with flashlights and rifles. The lead officer pointed directly at Tunde. Tunde Ajayi, you are under arrest for aggravated domestic violence, child endangerment, and unlawful confinement. Hands where we can see them. Tunde froze as he wondered how they got to know. What are you talking about? Who reported me? You have no proof. He barked, trying to compose himself, as he began to threaten the officers. Do you know who I am? How dare you barge into my house? I will teach you all a lesson, he said as the officers opened the door to his guest room and set his wife free. Tunde wondered how they knew she was there. He stood there shocked as the lead officer walked up to him and asked how his bruises were healing. It was in that moment that Tunde realized that the man who came up to beat him the other night was the same police officer. His name was Officer Yemi, and Tunde could not believe his eyes. He threatened to press charges against him for the beating of the other night, but the officer told him to try as he had no evidence to substantiate his claim. Tunde's eyes widened in realization as Yemi walked towards his shelf and pulled out a hidden camera. This, he said calmly, recorded everything, every slap, every scream, every time you pushed your wife. Even when you shoved your 9-year-old daughter to the floor. Tunde's mouth fell open, his hands trembling. For the first time in his life, he was speechless. Tunde, shaking from shame and fear, dropped to his knees as he began to beg. Please, it wasn't always like this. I was just angry. I didn't mean to. He stammered as the officer took him away. Dami stood quietly behind the couch, watching everything unfold as she realized that the man who she had been chatting with was the police officer and not the notorious Stone who she thought him to be. On that fateful day, when she put out that post, Yemi came across the post and wondered who it could be. He set up an anonymous account, pretending to be Stone, to see why the person was looking for Stone. To his greatest shock, he realized that he was chatting with a child. So, he tracked down the chat and located their home. But what he didn't expect was the second message Dami sent that night. The message that made his blood run cold. My daddy is beating my mommy right now. Yemi wasted no time. He rushed there in plain clothes that night, knowing that he could not wait for backup. His heart pounded with urgency as he drove through the quiet streets. That night, he saved the woman and terrified the monster, not as Stone, but as a police officer who had seen so many women die from the hands of a man who claimed to love them. Before leaving their house that night, Yemi planted a camera hidden neatly behind the bookshelf. He did it because something in Dami's message told him that this was not a one-time abuse. This was a pattern, a cycle, a hell trapped inside their home. And if he wanted to save the woman, he needed proof strong enough to bury a man like Tunde for good. He didn't just expect the proof to come so fast. When the officers dragged Tunde away that night, Bumi collapsed into a chair, her breath shaky, her hands trembling like leaves caught in a storm. Dami ran to her and wrapped her arms tightly around her waist, hugging her with the desperation of a child who feared her mother could vanish if she blinked. Mommy, she whispered, he won't hurt you again. Bumi nodded weakly, tears spilling onto Dami's hair. She was too exhausted to speak. But for the first time in years, her tears were not from pain. They were from relief. As they both sat there, Yemi walked up to Dami as he began to speak. Dami, you are such a brave girl to stand up for your mother, even when the world ignored your cries, Officer Yemi said gently, kneeling to Dami's level. But promise me something. Never again wish to be like the people who harm others. You don't need fear to be powerful. You have courage, Dami, and that makes you stronger than any robber. Dami nodded slowly, her eyes filled with tears, not of fear, but of quiet understanding. That day, Tunde was taken away by the police, who charged him for multiple counts of domestic abuse and child endangerment. Bumi was taken to the hospital, and Dami stayed by her side the whole time, holding her hand tightly, though her heart still carried the scars of what they had endured. Dami now knew that she didn't need to be feared to be strong. She had fought back in the only way that she could, with her voice, her courage, and her love for her mother. And that was how a 9-year-old girl taught her father a lesson that he would never forget, that no matter how small, truth and bravery will always roar louder than violence. The lesson to be learned from this story is that courage does not always come with size or strength. It comes from love and the will to do what's right. Dami, only 9, proved that even a child's voice can shake the walls of silence and injustice when no one else dares to speak. In a world where people looked away, she stepped forward. She taught her father and the world that fear is not power and violence is not strength. True power lies in protecting the vulnerable, standing for what is right, and choosing to be brave even when you are afraid. I hope